does give me great pleasure to invite Stuart along here this evening. He's a charming man who has led and continues to lead an interesting life. Olympian, broadcaster, teacher, coach, Deputy Lieutenant of Hertfordshire and Chairman of Wadson Park. Wadson was established over 30 years ago now, and Stuart had made a huge contribution to its success. But who better to tell you more?
Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Jan. I am injured. In fact, I've got to the stage in my career where I injure my injuries. So anyway, I'm going to start at the end and then go back to the beginning. In the middle of October, I received this, and it says on the front, it's a card, once an Olympian, always an Olympian, from the Mexico Olympic Committee, or those as part of the Olympian movement. And it was the 55th anniversary. So, you know, it brought back lots of memories of those Olympic years, which I'll talk a little bit. But I'm going to go right back to a place that Diney and I know. Now, Diney and I go back to 1950 something.
Excuse me, I'm now Di.
She's now Di. We go back to, and all those years ago, there was a park. I lived in Holbeach in Lincolnshire, and there's a park called Carter's Park. And Carter's Park had a marvellous big green area where cyclists, road runners, all sorts of sport took place each year. It was quite a big thing in those days. It doesn't happen anymore, of course. And I remember, I was 7 at the time, and I remember being pushed into a race against a little lad called Reggie Wright. Now, I had Wellingtons on, and it was raining, and I came out of the blocks, or what looked like a bit of hole in the ground, and fell over twice and came in second. Well, that actually was the start of my athletics career. I had no intention of being an athlete of any sort in the early days, because in Holbeach there was nothing. We had very few facilities, and it was a matter of just open spaces. We didn't have swimming pools. We didn't have stadia where we could go indoors and participate as they are now. So we had to make do. But fortunately, I got at the age of 13, I went into Spalding Grammar School as a student, and in 1957-58, I met a PE teacher there, and that Eric Broom. I'm still in touch with him. He's well in his 90s now, and he's in Canada at the moment, and he's one of their top field hockey coaches. Although he started off as a teacher of PE at Spalding Grammar School, and he was way ahead of his years, because he said to me, you know, we need to get somebody to run over these hurdles, because he was a bit of an athlete buff. So I was terrible at it. I mean, I said, well, okay, I'll have a go at it. And I ran over these hurdles, and he said, well, you'll do. And I said, okay. So I entered the school sports, and of course no one else was doing it. So it was a bit of a fake win, really, but I won that. And then I went to the Holland sports, the district sports, and so forth, and eventually ended up in 1958 at the All England Schools Championships. And I remember representing Spalding Grammar School and representing Lincolnshire. And that was when it really started, except there was a little bit of a hiccup there, because when I went into that championship, I came out as the slowest in my heat, and it was the slowest time of all the heats. So I was actually, in every sense of the word, last. There was no one else behind me. So I thought, I went back to the grammar school and I said to Eric, you know, look, I've got to do something about this. This is ridiculous. I don't like coming last. And he said, well, we'll do some weight training. And I said, weight training? What's that? And he said, well, we'll make some weights. I said, what do you mean make some weights? And he said, well, we get the parents to send in biscuit tins, round biscuit tins, and the innards of toilet rolls. And so we make a hole in the biscuit tins, put the innards in, and then we fill it with concrete, tape it up, and then get it weighed and put a bar through it, and we've got a set of weights. And then we built our own bench and so forth. So I started powering away on weight training. Very naive, didn't quite know what I was doing at that time. But anyway, and I then started training quite hard. And to cut a long story short, 1 year later, I went to the All England Schools Championships and won the gold medal. So I went from last to first in 1 year. And the following year, I remember the hurdles got bigger, much bigger. And so I had to work much harder. And I got a silver medal the following year and got a lot of experience and got a silver medal. And then I was beaten by a guy called Metcalf. I don't know why I always remember the people that beat me, but I remember his name. And it wasn't Adrian Metcalf, it was another Metcalf from way up north in Durham. He was a representative from Durham, and I've never heard or seen him since. But the following year, then I went back and won the gold medal again for the second time, but this time I broke the British record. And things started to look up, because I had no idea what I was going to do. Like most young people at that time, I had no idea what I was going to do. What was I going to do? So I thought, well, I'll try and look to a sports college. And so I looked towards Loughborough College, Loughborough College of Education at that time. And I remember I put in an application. And in those days, we were grant aided to go to university and college, which is a major contrast to what happens today. And I remember putting in an application, and I then got an acceptance, and I went for the interview. And I went for an interview with a gentleman who was a Greek who had been in the United Kingdom for many years, Basil Stamatakis. And he said to me, "Mr. Storey, I want you see the wall, do the handstand." And I did a handstand. He said, "You're in." I said, "Is that the interview?" He said, "Yes, I need high hurdler, best high hurdler, junior hurdler in Britain, and you're in." And so I immediately got in on one handstand. And so that was the way in which it worked in those days, because Loughborough, it was in the amateur era, of course. And I left in 1965, but I was there from 62 to 65, and it was very much part of an amateur arrangement where we had pretty well the whole of the Great Britain international athletics team at the college. Pretty well. And we had the 4x4 relay that you could see on your television at that time with Robbie Brightwell, John Cooper, John Sherwood, Tim Graham. There was only Adrian Metcalf missing, and Barry Jackson were the two that were outside of the college. And of course, each year we used to have a big competition between the college, the present students, and the past students. And so I competed for about 10 years in this meet, and it was really good, because at the end of that time, in 1965, I remember getting an invitation to go to East Germany, the German Democratic Republic at that time, to represent England. And that was at a time when when the German Democratic Republic were competing against major international countries and minor countries, and we were not Great Britain, we were England. And that was the time, that was when when we started to learn about the process of ergogenic aids within the context of national organizations cheating in sport. And of course, you remember that East Germany, as we used to call it, East Germany was a country that eventually took on the rest of the world in a very big way, particularly their women, and some of those world records still stand from that era. We know that they were drug aided, and we know that, but that's how it was at the time. They were convincing, and there were many athletes, and the women were far better than the men. And there was a program which developed the female to become closer to the male in terms of their hormonal intake. And of course, eventually, I mean, it's a horrific story really when you think back to some of the women are now men, and some of the women gave birth to disabled children straight away. It was quite tragic, actually. The whole thing was, you could see it happening, and and a lot of early deaths too. And so it was very, very much tragic. But the difference between going and traveling into East Germany and into West Germany was dramatic. It was like going from Piccadilly Circus to a mortuary, quite frankly. But 1965, for me, at that time, having left Loughborough, having all of this introduced to international athletics, having left Loughborough, 1967, I went from Loughborough to teach physical education and mathematics at Dr. Challoner's Grammar School. And that was quite an opportunity for me, and I stayed there for 2 years. But I met some wonderful people at that school. And I remember, and it's interesting, Shirley and I hosted, one of my students was called Steve Chappell. And Steve Chappell was a young lad who I took to his first ever pole vault coaching session with a guy called Morton Evans at Cavendish School and in Hemel Hempstead. And Morton and Steve eventually became a very good pole vaulter. And his claim to fame was that he beat Nordvig, the East German pole vaulter, who was the Olympic champion, and beat him at the White City, which was quite something. And then, of course, Steve went off to the United States and married a young woman in the United States. And to cut a long story short, her father owned the biggest athletics equipment company in America, and he now owns that. And about 2 months ago now, he came to stay with Shirley and I, with his wife, and it was absolutely fantastic to chew the fat. And I was hosting a golf day at that particular time, and I got him to be the guest of honor. And they insulted him by calling him an Australian. That was a terrible thing to do. So 1967, Dr. Challoner's, that's where I don't know if any of you remember the 5-star award program for kids at school for athletics. Well, that's where it was developed. Alan Launder, who was the head of department at that particular time, who I got to know and who stayed with us umpteen times over the years, and eventually he became the Australian Olympic coach. There were a lot. He was an incredible character, because I remember we were sitting at home one night and the doorbell went, and there was a chap standing at the door, and he said, Alan said we could stay. And I said, oh, okay. Are you a pole vaulter? Because there was a pole out there. He said, yeah, but there's one or two of us. It was the whole of the Australian junior athletics team. The whole team, and we housed the whole team. They were lying on tables, floors, everywhere, and we had to put some of them out to other places during the evening. It was quite something. So, but Alan Launder, Tom McNabb, and I joined it later. And also, you may remember a gentleman, some of you, called Bruce Tulloh. Bruce Tulloh, who was the chap who ran across America, who was one of Britain's finest. He took over. He came to teach biology. So we had myself with sprints and hurdles, Alan Launder with some of the other technical events, Bruce Tulloh with the long distance, and then we had it pretty well covered. And our team beat the whole of all the teams, the best team formed from all the schools in the south of England. And we beat them all in athletics meets for what was the Southern Milacarian Championships at that time. So 1960, what did I do in 67? Well, Alan and I, we decided we'd go to America. And the reason I wanted to go to America was because I wanted to train in the warmth for the Olympic Games, which were in 68. And I'd missed qualification for the 1964 Games in Tokyo. So I thought I'd really like to have a go at this. And so I went out to Western Kentucky University with some of the other people from Loughborough had gone, and we knew a little bit about it. And I went as a graduate assistant and trained in the heat of Kentucky, and We had a really good time teaching, coaching. I did a master's degree at the same time to fill in the time when I wasn't training. And of course, 67 was a very good year before I went to America. Competitively, I was going quite nicely, representing Great Britain against Hungary and so forth with my other colleague, Alan Pascoe. And we went all over Europe and competed. But I wanted the Olympics. And so I went out and came back in May of 1968. But it was down south, you know, and I was coaching a black triple jumper. And the reason I say a black triple jumper was because I was called in by the director of the university to say that he really did look down upon the fact that I was having breakfast with my athlete. Because being down south in America in the 1960s was very racial. And of course, he said, it will affect your grades. And I said, well, I'm really not here for my grades. I said, I'm doing this I'm teaching and coaching. I was coaching volleyball, judo, and I was the assistant track coach. And Alan and I were the assistant track and field athletics coaches. So I let it go and just continued. And it didn't affect my grades in the end because, you know, they realized. I said, look, we're British. We have a different attitude, totally different attitude, the way we greet our athletes. He's an athlete. He's nothing more than an athlete and a good friend, actually. I got to know him very well. And he was world class. So 1968, I came back to the Olympic Games. Well, I qualified in Leicester. And Mike Parker, who was, and Alan Pascoe were my two teammates at the Olympic Games. And I remember we went to the trials, and I won the trials and got the Olympic qualifying time. And Alan got it as well. And then Mike Parker said, Stu, will you run again? Let's have another trial race because I've missed it by 1/10 of a second. And I said, well, okay, we'll do that. And so when we ran it again, both of us tied at the same time, which was the Olympic qualifying time. So he actually got into the Olympic Games. And so I had to get hold of him recently because he sent me a book that he'd written. He said, and it was a magnificent book. And I said, can I draw your attention to the chapter on the Olympic trials, which says that on the rerun of the second race, you actually won it. And I said, I would like to take you apart for that because that is not what actually happened. And so we smiled about it. He was a top executive in Saatchi. And I said, well, you know, I can understand how you got the job you got. So 1968, we went out, and I sat next to the landing area when Bob Beamon jumped 8 meters and 90, which was quite astonishing. And no one, I know I've got a bad foot, but I'm going to just show you how far that is. From that chair, he lands here. So that was the world record, 8 meters and 90 in the long jump in Mexico City. And I actually watched it, and he jumped beyond the measuring device. They had this long metal measuring device. He jumped beyond it. And so they had to stop the competition, get a metal tape and measure it. And the wind speed, absolutely 2 meters per second, which is allowable. Anything 2.01 would have failed it. But it was absolutely, and of course, all of the world's press were over at the finish of the 100 meters, the blue ribbon event. And so they all rushed across to cheat the second shot, to say this was Bob Beamon breaking the world record in the long jump. But unfortunately for them, it started to rain. And Beamon put on a pair of socks. And so they couldn't cheat it. Sitting up next to me was a guy that I got to know quite well later called Tony Duffy. He was on his holidays. And he took the most famous picture of Beamon. He was a bit of a photography buff, and he took this magnificent picture of Beamon jumping, which is the one that everyone sees worldwide. And for that, he got £10,000 because no one else could get it. Because Ralph Boston, Lynn Davis, who was the defending Olympic champion, Igor Taravanesyan was also there. All the top jumpers had still to jump. No one had ever jumped 28 feet before, let alone 29 feet 2.5, which is the translation of that particular 8 meters and 90. And of course, the Canadian commentator, at that time, we had the tables, and we had metric tables, and we had feet and inches, and we had metric. So I could hear this commentary when Ron Pickering came back. There's another story I'll tell you about that. Ron came back and he said that it was hilarious because he actually said, well, that's a pretty good jump. This is the commentator. Yes, that's a good jump by Beeman. I'll just check on the 8 meters because he was from Canada, feet and inches. Yeah, that looks quite good. Just looking across. Hang on a minute. That's 20. That's 28 feet. That's not even 28 feet. Hang on a minute. That's 29 feet. It's a world record. Took him ages to get to the world record when everyone else had given it away. So and that £10,000 developed the first and the biggest photography agency in the world called All Sport, and that was how All Sport was actually developed. And so I went to the 21st birthday party of All Sport, and who was there but Mr. Bob Beeman? So I had a chance to chat to Bob Beeman again. So it was really quite something. And I knew at that time in Mexico that things were happening. Adidas were obviously after Beeman because I was in the bank getting some first day stamps, getting them stamped. And he came into the bank with armfuls of pesetas. I mean, he had bags full of pesetas, and obviously someone had said, you come to Adidas. This is the first time that we saw the first signs of the sport becoming professional, because the shoe companies wanted to buy in, everybody wanted to buy in, and so it was quite an occasion. And also, in 1968, press could come in and could knock on your door and say, "Will you give us an interview?" And we'd say, yeah, okay, all right. Now, of course, I'll go forward and then I'll come backwards. Munich, the disaster of the assassination of the Jewish wrestling team, and it then changed. David Coleman was in bed. David Coleman was dragged out of bed by BBC. They didn't use any of their newsreaders. They said David Coleman is going to do the broadcast. And it was one of the best broadcasts you could hear. You could see it. There was the balcony, and there were these hooded figures. And what was so wonderfully emphatic for me was the lack of words that he said. It was so beautifully done, because he always said to me, and I'll tell you about our relationship as we go along, but he always said to me, the silence is golden in broadcasting. And the commentator always says what the picture does not say. And that's not the case these days, unfortunately. But that's how it was. So 1968, Beeman. I missed the semi-final by a hundredth of a second. So did Alan, and so did Mike. So we didn't have best, but we'd only run on two rubber tracks. We were all. This is why I've got a fused ankle here, because blasting on cinders over 3'6" hurdles on Carter's Park in Holbeach, you'd laugh. I sat in a bar with Alan Johnson, who was the Olympic and world high hurdles champion. And Alan said to me, well, when you did the Olympics, what was it like? I said, I'll tell you what it was like. I said, there's the bowls green in Holbeach, and there's the cinder path along by the football pitch. And I said, my dad made my blocks, hammer and nails, 6-inch nails, homemade blocks. And I had 3 hurdles, and I had to have someone standing at the entrance of the bowling green to stop them walking out so that I didn't go straight through them when I was hurdling over 3 hurdles. Well, by that time, we were sitting on the top floor of the Shanghai Athletic Stadium. And by that time, he was in tears of laughter. And I said, you don't know you're born, because we were amateurs. And we had to actually pay to get into meetings. We had to pay to get into competition. You know, it was so different. But the learning process, to be in a situation where you are standing in the middle of that Olympic stadium, and I've got a big photograph of it at home, a huge photograph, and I'm in there somewhere, but I can't find me. I was at the opening ceremony as part of the British team, which was quite, you know, in those days everybody wanted to get in and be part of that, the Olympic movement. Things have changed these days. A lot of them do, but some of the better athletes prefer not to, because they know they're going to do 2 or 3 Olympic Games, and they want to make sure that their scheduling is right for their competition. So it's a very different thing. It's far more professional now. So David Coleman in 1968. How can I put this? Ron Pickering, I got to know Ron quite well, and Ron actually said to me, you'll never believe what David's commentary in the 100 meters in Mexico. I said, well, I think you're going to tell me. And he said, yeah. He said, I'll tell you. It went something like this. Well, there's the lineup for the 4th heat of the men's 100 meters. Drawn in lane 1, Vasilias Papagiorgopoulos of Greece. Next to him, from Madagascar, only 5'5", couldn't say it. And he took 6, 7, 8, or 9 takes at this. We were recorded because they were recorded because it was overnight. Then they were recording back in the UK. And he said, I'm going ahead again in 5. And they said, stop talking, David, stop talking. Coming to you live. He was trying to say Jean-Loup Ravalomantasoa of Madagascar. He got Vasilias Papagiorgopoulos in lane 1, Jean-Loup Ravalomantasoa of Madagascar in lane 2. And he turned to me, Ron said he turned to me and he said, Ron, how good are these 2? They're going to come first and second. Oh, no. So he said, cue David. Well, the 4th heat, there's been a bit of a delay on this 4th heat of the 100 meters, but drawn in lane 1, Vasilias Papagiorgopoulos of Greece. In lane 2, the tiny Madagascan. In lane 3, he never once mentioned his name. He couldn't mention his name. So Mexico was wonderful. One of the good parts about it, all our press were held at gunpoint at one stage on the balconies in their hotels, which amused us somewhat because normally they were giving us a hard time. So Mexico was the start of many things. But moving on to 72, before I get to 72, I'm going to just make the point that in 1970, I was, at that time, when I moved on back from Mexico, I took on the job at Debden Community Association and Loughton College. Another lady who's mentioned to me that she was part of that organisation in those early days. And it was the first sports centre I actually built on site there. I was in charge of all of the sport at the College of Education and also Debden Community Association, which was the largest community association in the UK. It had more than 4,000 members, if you remember, at that time. It was huge. And I got to know the people involved there, and it was quite an opportunity, really. And so I must admit that at that time, I remember having a session with some students, and one student who came to me and said to me, the young woman who has the students from the local high school has just turned up with all her girls. And I said, well, they can't come in because it's double booked. So he went away. And then he came back and he said, I told her, she wasn't very happy. He says he wasn't very happy at all. He said, but he was a mature student, and he said to me, "But I do think you should meet this young woman." And so in 6 months after that meeting, Shirley and I were married. It was quite something, I have to say. But that was how it was. And I came to Ware, despite the fact that my lovely mother-in-law lived only a couple of miles away. But Della, of course, Della Gardner, who she was then, was a big swim coach in the area, and of course, well known in the area of Ware. So I married a Ware girl. And that was 1970. And of course, if I move forward to 72, to the Olympic Games of 72, I wasn't party to it, but I watched that program with David Coleman, as I said, and also everything changed because the assassinations, they had to debate whether the Olympics should go on, or whether it should be abandoned. And of course, they eventually got the right answer that it shouldn't be abandoned. You can't give in to terrorism in that way. But David's broadcasting was superb, and you know, I learned an awful lot from him, which I'll talk about. So the Munich disaster meant that in 1976, which was my first Olympics, everything changed. Everything changed. But locally, Shirley and her team of basketball in 73, wasn't it? Yes, 73, were the top basketball team in Britain. And they were in the Guinness Book of Records 6 consecutive years. And they came from Ware. They were Ware girls, and there were 1 or 2, sorry?
It's part of East Harts College.
Yes, Turnford College. It was Turnford College at that time. So they were to compete in the very first ever competition for European clubs. So it was the European Clubs Championships. And she said, "Would you come along and would you announce to the crowd?" And I said, "Well, yeah." I said, "Who are they playing?" Well, they were playing a team called Clermont-Ferrand of France. And Shirley, who was played centre, was surrounded by 3 big 6'4" French women, and hardly ever saw the ball, if I remember correctly. But they were absolutely, the technical term for the way in which they lost, they were buried. They were absolutely buried. But it was someone in the audience heard me do it, and I introduced the players and did all the rest and did a little bit of a commentary on it, and I got a phone call from the BBC, from Ron Pickering actually, who said, "Look," he said, "He did a good job last night." He said, "David's gone AWOL for a while. Come over and try out." So I went and I tried out, and I obviously must have done quite well because I never ever got the result of my audition. And I remember when David finally turned up in 1970, at the end of 73, just before, yes, it was right at the end of 1973, and he sat next to me. And he said, "I'm not going to bring you into this live broadcast." He said, "Just sit back, look, listen, learn." I said, "Thank you very much." And I leaned back. And during the broadcast, it was a live broadcast on the Friday evening, and so the commentary from David, he was getting bored. He was getting absolutely bored. And in the end, he said, "A steeplechase at first so-and-so, second so-and-so, third so-and-so, terrible race, should never been in the programme, and a very slow time indeed. And now for an update on the javelin, here's Stuart Storey." And I picked up the microphone, and he put his hand over my microphone, and he said, "Always be prepared. Always be prepared. And just remember," he said, as a comment I've made earlier, that the commentator says what the picture doesn't say. And also, he taught me at that time the basics of editing with my voice. So you would never know this, but when you're on the television and when in David's era, in our era, we would give just 2 seconds here and there. For example, when I did the Olympic final in 2000 from Sydney, 11 million viewers, and David was top man. He said, right, I'm going to give you 10 minutes. He overruled everybody and said, right, we're going to do 10 minutes. You're doing it. And so I gave a nice background to the history of some of the big names of the Olympic Games. Just a couple of seconds, then go into the lane by lane. And we have umpteen. I'm not going to hand these out because they're in fact, I don't know what I've done with them now. I had some sheets where the sheets are, they give all the information from the statisticians and stuff. And he said, it's 8 seconds for each of these. Now, if you saw the amount of information that we get and have to select 8 seconds worth for each athlete, then it is quite a skill in the end, and it took a long time to learn that. So I did the lane by lane, and then he said to me, nudged me, and he said, have a line. He said, Sports Review of the Year in those days, when the BBC had sport, we used to have our own commentary as part and parcel of the whole programme. So he said, have a line. So I did the big background, some of the big names, the lane, 8 seconds lane by lane, just not a lot, just a little bit. And then I said, and when it all went quiet, what has gone before has no meaning. This is the Olympic final. And he nudged across, he said, good line, lad. He used to call me the lad, because, you know, I mean, David died some years ago now, bless him. He became a very, very close friend. And the first broadcast I had was 1974. And now, how is this all happening at the same time? Because there's one bit I've missed out here, because from 1973, I was in the staff room of the College of Education, Further Education. And one of the teachers came up and said, there's a good job here at the Thames Polytechnic, he said. Well, I said, I'm only an L1, but this is an L2, which is bordering on a senior lectureship. So I said, well, I'll have a go at it. So I applied, and I got an interview. And it was the most amusing interview ever, because I went in, Shirley waited out in the car, and I went in, and we laughed. We had so much fun in that interview. It was just, because there's no way I was going to get it. I mean, I knew that there was no way I was going to get this job. Anyway, so right at the very end of the interview, the director said to me, he said, well, have you any questions of us? And I said, well, no, I haven't. I said, but in those days, of course, there were no mobile phones. And when you went on holiday, you were on holiday. You know, you were away and out of it. So I said, look, I said, if you were to offer me this job, and we'd had so much fun and laughing, and I said, if you were to offer me this job, I'm leaving on holiday tomorrow. And I said, I'll be back in 2 weeks, and please don't think that I'm ignoring any offer that you might make, thinking, well, there's no way they're going to. Anyway, 8:30 in the following morning, the director phoned me. He said, I've never laughed so much in all my life, come and join us. So I got the job. And so that was the Woolwich Polytechnic, which is now the Greenwich University. And so the reason I mentioned that at this time is because I'm in television, I'm also lecturing. So it worked in parallel. So most of the athletics was in weekends and in vacations. So it didn't interfere with the job that I was doing as far as the Polytechnic at that time was, because, and also they liked the Olympic bit. They liked the Olympian, you know, is head of our physical education department and all of that stuff. So that helped quite a lot. And so I was working right the way through with the Thames Polytechnic. And then, of course, we took over Dartford Women's PE College. And then I became head of all the athletics there. And I was in charge of, well, every part of the athletics program for all the women PE teachers at Dartford. Shirley was in Bedford. That was the other major PE college in the country. And they devised a new degree, and that degree I didn't enjoy it at all, because it gave so little emphasis to the practical elements of track and field athletics, because PE staff at that time had wanted parity with the academics in the staff room. So they went for what they called a BA degree at that time, Bachelor of Education degree, where there's a lot of work on the actual background philosophies and all the background of the sort of background of the sports themselves, but no practical. So at the end of that time, I got approached by the London physical education inspectors, and they said, would I take all of the London probationary teachers, every single one of them, and take them to Barn Elms, which is in the south of London, and to a track there, and would I teach them the technical events in track and field athletics, because they didn't know anything, and they were going out to schools to teach these people. So, and it was an interesting time really, because you know, working in television on one side gave me a little bit of you know, they quite enjoyed, you know, being part of that. But some of them, for example, I said, a young woman, a young teacher comes into your staff room and says, I've just jumped 6 meters and 46, miss. Is that any good? And not a flicker anywhere, not a flicker. And I said, well, actually, you've got a good student there, because it's the distance that Mary Rand jumped to win the Olympic gold medal. So just keep hold of that athlete, won't you? And some clever so-and-so stood up and said, you'd never get anybody at school age going to the Olympics and doing that. And I said, well, what about Sheila Sherwood? And I named a few at that time. It happens with young women, but it doesn't happen with men. We've had one 17-year-old male make the 200-meter team some time ago, but that doesn't happen very often. So here we are. I'm working with all of the students in Dartford. We took over another college as well, and also running the whole of the recreation program in what was then the Thames Poly. And at the same time working with television. And the first championship I went to was the European Championships in Rome in 1974. And I remember I thought, well, this is all right. I got into we're flying business class, because David Coleman liked business class. So I said to him, whatever you do, David, tell me what flight you're on, and I'm coming with you. Then they'll put me in business as well. So he said, no, you're in business anyway. I said, oh, okay, fine. So we'd always fly business class. And we went into the hotel, the Cavalieri Hilton Hotel in Rome. Now, if anybody's ever stayed there, it is the top hotel in Rome. That was when the BBC, you know, had real money and didn't put it all into football, and had real money so that they could provide for other sports as well. And I remember Ron and I in the lift, and this rather attractive young woman came and stood in the lift, and no luggage, just going up to the floor, and then she pressed the button, and Ron was trying to say something. He was trying desperately to get words out to speak to this young woman. And eventually she left the lift, and I said, what is wrong with you? And he said, you know who that was? I said, no. He said, it was Gina Lollobrigida, the film star. I said, oh. So I went down to breakfast the following morning. I thought, this hotel is all right. There was Ernest Borgnine, Burt Lancaster, all having breakfast with me. Not with me, but in the breakfast area. I thought, I like this. This is the business. And that was my first major championship, and it was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. In those days, we didn't have computers. We had to do it all from our own little tables, where we had conversions of metric to feet and inches and so forth. And it was, and I was mostly concerned with the field events at that time, learning the trade, so to speak, where Ron and David were doing most of the track. And I got a look in at my own event occasionally, because they would all ask me for an opinion on the technicals on hurdling and so forth. So that worked quite well. But the actual venue was beautiful. Everything about the championship was beautiful, and it was the first of umpteen European Athletics Championships that I did, in double figures, I think it was in the end. I must go and count them again. But it was very, very special. But I'm going to go back to 1972 because 1974 was affected by 1972. This is my London Olympic accreditation. I did 10 Summer Olympics in the end, and I did 10 summer and 4 winter, so it's 14 plus the one I was in, which was 15 Olympic Games. And of course, this, you can't go anywhere without these in an Olympic Games. And actually, when we came to 1974, that is when it all changed. Because you couldn't, the press couldn't and the media could not get into the living area of athletes. Absolutely no chance whatsoever. So there became an intermediate area. And so what you had to do then was to phone in from your hotel to the management of the British team and say, you know, can we have an interview with so-and-so, and can we time it? And they'll say, yes, okay, you can come in. And so we'd go in, and they would then, you'd go into the first door, and you'd give this in, and you'd take another accreditation, which got you into the middle area. Now, once you got into the middle area, then you could do your interview and take your cameras in and do the interview. And then when you get out again, you then give that accreditation in, and so it became unbelievably difficult to get. Oh gosh, I think that's me, isn't it? Sorry. It was very difficult to get interviews easily, and so we worked on the basis that we would try and get interviews before the games actually began, so that we could get them out of the village itself and into the BBC studios, or into an area. And I did many interviews with athletes in just outside, in areas which the track, anywhere near the track. The track itself, 1976, learned from 1974. And when you get there to an Olympic Games, you have to go and find out how to get in. And by that I mean, when you approach an Olympic stadium, you have to find, that's the first thing David and I always did, and Ron, that's what we always did. And we tried to find where the BBC television commentary position was. And once we'd found it, then we would work out the way in which we were going to negotiate this when the Olympic Games started. So in you go, and then you look at the desk, and David would say, "Who put this together?" And he said, "Where's all this spaghetti coming from?" Meaning all the cabling, all over the floor, all over the place. So you'd trip up over it, you'd do everything. And it was all over the table. And he'd say to me, "That's me, that's you, don't come over that line." And I said, "Okay, but that's me, don't come over my line. I'm bigger than you." But it was great. We had a great relationship. Once we'd got the monitors sorted out, and we'd got everything and tested the microphones, we'd got everything sorted, then we were ready to start the first morning of the Olympic Games. And that's always a bit of a challenge, because you never know what's quite going to happen technically. And so often things went wrong technically on the first day, on the first morning. You'd lose sound, or you'd lose pictures, or something. And so the first problem we had was finding that they'd changed the entrance to the stadium. So we had to find our way in again. So it was, and you wouldn't believe how difficult that was. You could not find your way into the Olympic Stadium. We were working there. And eventually you had to find a way that worked. And then you'd say, "Okay, look, we're coming early tomorrow morning to make sure it's still the same entrance." Because things changed all over the place. It was quite extraordinary the way that things changed. And so eventually we got ourselves sorted, and we then said, "Okay, that's the commentary position sorted, the International Broadcast Centre, where all the scanners are, where every sport in the Olympic Games is being transmitted all over the world, and the UK have got their own cameras, as well as using the host cameras as well. And so it was the place where you had to find out where it was, as well as the International Press Centre. So the press centre was huge. When you've got 12,000 journalists wandering around, and at that time it was paper. You all had to go and find bits of paper. There were no computers or anything like that. It was always go to, this is where you find the results of these events and so forth. And particularly when you'd got the decathlon. The decathlon was quite difficult, actually, because I took on the decathlon with Ron in 1976, and we just had our own tables. So, for example, everything in terms of the performance is transferred to times. So everything is times. Whether you've got a height or a distance, it's always converted to times. So we had to do our conversions ourselves. In other words, how many points would a certain performance give us? And I always remember the head of sport sitting behind me, and he was tenacious. He was a real sport buff. And I can remember him saying to me, the javelin, what's he got to throw in the javelin to get him within distance for that 1,500 meters that's going to, and you have to think, now hang on a minute, you can't just go to any place on the tables. You have to know what his best is, so that you look at what the personal best of this particular athlete was and that particular athlete, and then you look at what they've thrown already, and then you sort of get an idea of the difference in the points, and then you say, right, it's got to make up 30 or 40 or 50 points in the 1,500 meters, which means he's got to beat him by so many seconds. So it got very complicated. And he also said to me, because I was a technical person with javelin and all of the discus and shot and so forth. And he used to say to me, Stuart, I do know you're right, he said, but please, can you let the javelin land before you tell him it's a championship record? But I said, I can tell you it's going to be a marvellous throw by the way in which it's delivered at the release. So, once you get into that situation, it gets very complicated, and you've got to think really hard. And in those days, the press used to go out and chase you around all over the place, and they'd love you to get it wrong, because that was it. And when you do an Olympic final, as I did twice, I did 2004 as well, in the 100 meters, which was the blue ribbon event. And you can just, they're all hoping that somebody gets something wrong. And I remember in '92, later on, I'm coming forward a bit now, when I did the women's 100 meters final. And I gave it to some girl in lane 2, and everybody said, oh no, you've got it wrong, you've got it wrong, you've got it wrong, you've got it wrong. It can't be, because all the top seeded athletes were in the middle 4 lanes. But I was right. And it was the first victory of a girl called Jan Goodeve of the United States, who went on to win not only then, but she won the following year as well, and won the hurdles. So they said, oh, okay, all right, fine. Sometimes it's very nerve-wracking, because you've got to try and get it right. And it doesn't help if you get it wrong sometimes. You always make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. And as we did in 1976, Ron and I did the pole vault and got it wrong. And the reason we got it wrong was because the first pole vault was a failure. And in those days, the rule was different. It was the number of vaults that they took. And so the actual final result changed on the basis that one athlete failed 1 vault right at the beginning of the competition. That's no longer the case. It's all very much simpler now. And it's dead easy now. They've got the computers and so forth. Moving on to 70, there was 76 was Montreal. That was wonderful. That's my first Olympics, and that was just quite something. I remember some of the things that happened there. I remember Ron Pickering's commentary of the 400 meters. It went something like this, because I sat next to him, and they said, it's Coleman that did that. I said, no, it didn't. It was Ron. I sat next to him. The men's 400 meters final. David Jenkins, Newhouse and Frazier of the United States, and Fontarina of Cuba, the big Cuban. And these big four now. And as the gun goes, Jenkins moves into the lead as they go approach the first bend. Jenkins leads, Newhouse and Frazier trailing, and Fontarina way behind. But as they reach 200 meters, Fontarina opens wide his legs and shows his class. And we thought that was one of the great moments. And remember Frank Boff with the pole vault. He said, well, now we'll join the commentators and see the pole vault over the satellite. We said, that's got to be a record, Frank. Got to be a record. Yeah, I mean, some of the things that happened there were funny, because I sat with Hammy Bland, who was the swimming and water polo and commentator, and we were sitting and looking at breakfast, and we were watching the water polo game. And I said, Hammy, who's playing? Good God, he said, it's mine. It was his, and he had to rush out, and all of a sudden you heard a breathless voice come on and start commentating, because it was over the satellite, you see. It was in the middle of the night, and that was where little Harry Carpenter, Little H, as we called him, Little H, who sat in that seat, we had a little booth, and you had a little motif that came up on the screen, broadcasting back to London, and there was the boxer, and then Harry would do his commentary, and then we would pull him out, and I was there to do some basketball, and then there was the president of the Volleyball Association, who I shall not name, who stood at the door, and I said it was his first ever commentary. And I said, okay, yeah, fine, no problem, right, okay. So I got hold of Little H, and pulled him out, and said, right, get in. And up came the volleyball motif on the screen. So, and they said to me, look after him, for God's sake, please look after him. So you might, a lip mic, you have to hold here, like this, right up on the lip. And he sat there, and I said, cue. The service, the dig, the spike, 1-0. The service, the dig, the spike, 2-0. Tell them who's playing and which side of the net, who's on which side of the net, and give them the odd name here and there. The service, the dig, the spike, 3-0, and then up on the screen came a record. It was a recording, and they'd put the wrong scoreboard up, and the score was all wrong. And not live on the air, back to London, he said, "Oh God, what do I do now? They've got the wrong score up on the boards." So they said, "Stu, get him out of there." So I had to do the volleyball as well as the basketball. So it was amusing. So there were some wonderful, amusing moments. Those commentaries in the early days. But those are the ones you remember, the ones that we were very young and starting out. 76 went on to 1980, hated it. Moscow, I hated Moscow. I thought that was one of the worst Olympics I've ever been to. There were no children, no dogs, no cats. The weather wasn't that great. We didn't see, they were all soldiers around the outside, disguised as spectators. It was the most, disappointing. John Shrewsbury and I, he was my athletics producer at that time, we walked into the front door of the hotel and we said, and they had the aircraft, the normal sort of thing where you go through the gap and get your radio, whatever it is. And we went through and nothing bleeped. Went up to our rooms, and when we came down, this young woman shouted across from the desk, "Mr. Shrewsbury, you have left your light on." He said, "Pardon, how does she know my name? And how does she know I left my light on?" And of course, they were all KGB. They were opposite the KGB office, their headquarters. So all the girls were very attractive, all KGB. So the next thing that happened was our chef de mission was called to the manager of the hotel and said, Mr. Weeks, you must tell your technicians not to keep rewiring their rooms because they could hear. You could, in your room, when you switched the radio on, you could hear them talking in reception. And we were all going to bulbs going, testing, 1, 2, 1, 2. It was an absolute sporting disaster area of Moscow. I didn't enjoy it at all. And it rained a lot. David got that right. He said, I'm not coming this morning because it's wet. And I said, oh, okay. Well, Ron and I went and we got wet. And he joined in the evening, he normally did. He was the top dog, really. I learned so much from him. He was my mentor. He took time to teach me how to operate, within the context of television, in all aspects of television. What's the cameraman trying to do? And I was one of those very fortunate people that when I had they call them cans, headphones, cans. I could have a full feed. I can open mic feed. So I could hear the director talking to cameras. I could hear everybody talking to everybody else in my ears whilst I was still commentating on what was in front of me. So I could know when they were going to go to a particular camera shot. You say cameras, I'd find out where the master shot was always in the home straight. Then you find out where the other cameras are. It's part of the learning process. And you think, right, I'm going to camera 6. And then you say, I can say, right, they're saying, we're going to interview shortly. I can hear that. They're not talking to me yet. And then while I'm commentating, they'll say, right, Stuart, take us down to the interview area and introduce the athlete. So I'd know already where they were going, so I would be able to sort of do it quickly and efficiently and know exactly who was there because I was watching out for it and listening all the time. So that's another skill that you learn when you were broadcasting. And at the same time, of course, I was still lecturing. I was still flat out lecturing. I had a wonderful secretary who would phone me all over the world and say, I've got a little bit of a problem. I said, don't worry, tell me what it is. If we overran in the vacation, and I'd let the university know, the college know, they would be fine. And then she would do what I asked her to do. So it worked so well. It was mid-80s before I actually eventually went full-time to the BBC. I actually started with the BBC from that very first moment when I had the audition. But after the first 3 or 4 broadcasts, I got a phone call from ITV asking me if I'd like to come and work for them with a contract. And because BBC had given me a nice job, I said, well, actually, I'll leave it there for the moment. I went to see the head of sport, Alan Hart, and I said, Harty, they're offering me jobs at ITV now. He said, don't worry about it. So I was on 4-year contracts right the way through my career, and it worked really well. So there was David, myself, Ron, and then Brendan Foster came in to add a voice to, we needed a non-English speaking person in the team. So Brendan, Sir Bren now, he came to join us. Paul Dickinson came to join us, and we had a very strong team. It was a really strong team, and so 1980 was poor. 84, do you know, 84, Los Angeles, good God, is it that time? I'm not, if anyone yawns, I'm going to stop. 1984, did you nearly go to sleep there, Brian?
Yes.
Oh my goodness, I would never live it down if you did that. 1984 Los Angeles, very much Hollywood. Nothing outside of the Olympic stadiums. They were all knocking down their fences and charging people $100 for the morning and $100 in the afternoon just to park your car. So, it was very, very business. No real Olympic spirit, as you could, that I was used to. But Los Angeles, once it got over the Hollywood bit at the beginning, was all right, actually. It wasn't too bad. It was a very, very tight run ship, Los Angeles. And we had some good English performances, British performances, and one or two British failures as well. So, you know, it was changing for me, because I was now starting to get more track events, and eventually I started to get some big track events and big Olympic finals, which it takes a long time to get them to trust you to do them, because you're not supposed to get them wrong, you know. And with the audiences that we're getting in those days, you don't get them anywhere near that now. But 11 million for the 100 meters in Sydney was big. You don't get anywhere near that now. And also the BBC don't have the rights. They can't buy the rights directly now. They have to go through a company called Discovery, which runs pretty well everything in the media at the moment. And so that's why you're only getting 300 hours rather than 3,000 hours. And Shirley, of course, came out with me to cover in Sydney 2000. I know I'm wandering about a bit here, but to cover the Paralympics. And that was, you did all the logging of all the activities, didn't you? The sports activities, the swimming and opening ceremonies. And they used your logs because you were better than the logger that they'd actually taken over there. So that was a feather in the hat, so to speak. I'd probably get some food for that afterwards. Anyway, so 1988 was wonderful. Seoul, Dan Maskell. They said, take Dan and take him to the Olympic Stadium. Take him to the Olympic Stadium, and show him what it's about. And he was in tears next to me. He was in absolute tears, and he said, "Well, I've done all the tennis in the world. I've never seen anything like this. 167 countries passed by him, and we were right next to the Olympic flame, and it was so different culturally as well. It was the first one in South Korea that we really, and I had two interests at that time, because we'd been working on Watson Park from the beginning of the 80s, and we were getting close to getting the first part, at least the first part, finished and opened. And so when I came back from those Olympic Games in '88, Watson Park was well on the way. I'd had some wonderful people helping out, all Rotarians. I'd had Glaxo putting money in. I sat down and they said to me, we'll put because Farmer Woodson said, I donate this 25 acres to East Herts District Council. So East Herts District Council, we're going to put some huts on it and put football pitches all over it. So I said, oh no, we've got no large indoor space in East Hertfordshire. And said, let's get stuck into this. They said, all right, then you do it. So I said, all right, I'll do it. And so they then said, we'll give you £100,000 to start. And I said, can't do anything with £100,000. Give me $250,000. And so they said, yeah, but if we give you $250,000, then you're going to have to raise $350,000 in the year that follows, so that we then hand over the $250,000. Well, actually, we got within $75,000 of that figure. And I went to see Jimmy Barham, the late Jimmy Barham, chairman of Rialto Homes, who said, yes, he said, here's a check for $75,000. He said, we'll get the lawyers together, you can pay me back, because I'm a developer, obviously, and so I support what you're doing, but I don't want to be seen to be taking advantage in development terms, and I believed him. Anyway, so Jimmy gave me the check for $75,000, and at that particular time, I also put in with Bowen Wells, the then MP, for East. I'd put in a bid for the Sport and Arts Foundation for £150,000. And Bowen helped me enormously there, and I got that £150,000. And so I was able then to take Jimmy Barham to lunch at Hanbury Manor and give him back a cheque for £65,000, because we'd already paid a couple of months back to him. And he said, you need any more, then you come and see me. So I said, great. So I knew then that we'd got a backer that was very keen to help us. And so we then moved money was easy then. The lottery, I went to the lottery. I actually got 1.4 million from the lottery. That was quite good. Try that today and you'd be struggling a bit. And so 1.4 million. I went back and got another million, just under a million, and then another 147,000. And because I got to know everyone through television, I got to know all the Sports Council people, the Eastern Region Sports Council people at that time, and they were very helpful. And they you know, it was there, the money was there, so let's do it. And so we were able to get the first building built. The first part of it was only for 715,000. We put the original Woodson Park, which was opened on. This was our poor old temporary brochure. It was opened on Friday the 15th of September 1989, and we did a really nice opening, a nice dinner where everything failed. We hadn't got enough electrical power, so everyone was wandering around drunk all night because the food was so late coming. It was a wonderful evening, a total disastrously wonderful evening. It really was, and so. And then, of course, Glaxo came to me and they said, "Tell you what," they said, "can we get the football club to come and play at Woodson Park?" And I said, "Well, you can't really, because we've set it up as a registered charity." And they said, so I went back to East Herts and said, "Right, can we get some more land to stick on the end of Woodson Park, an extra 2.8 acres." Or thereabouts, 2.88 I think it was. And in the end it was agreed that we would do that. So the Woodson Park took over, and we're their landlords of the football club, which is now next to Woodson Park. And for that, Glaxo gave Woodson Park £1 million into an escrow account at 6%. So at the end of that year I took out £1,060,000. And then we set up the athletics track, along with the all-weather area, because the all-weather area pays for the athletics track. We'd paid off the bar loan, so we were free agents in every respect. So we were set up as a registered charity, and it's great. And of course we got walloped by the pandemic, and Jan, our CEO, has done remarkably well to keep the whole thing running. And whereas we used to make a substantial profit, we now break even, and it's a real struggle to break even these days, but we do that because we always said that we would never be a burden to the taxpayer, and we never have been a burden to the taxpayer, which I think is a lot of credit to all the people that have been involved, you know, over the years, and there have been quite a few involved over the years. So Woodson Park was built. That's the story behind Woodson Park. So that was on that side, and here I'm going forward to Barcelona in 92, 1996. What the best basketball team in the world I ever saw was the Dream Team, and I remember having said in 1984, Michael Jordan wears that number 23 shirt. And I said, Michael Jordan is a young player who played for the United States against Spain, and the United States won by 40 points. And at the end of that game, I sat down and I said, this young man shows some considerable promise. Michael Jordan, the most famous basketball player ever, and who's worth millions and billions. He's a billionaire now. So if you see the movie on the Nike, the setting up of Nike, then you see what part that Michael Jordan played in that. It's on Amazon, I think it is, one of the channels. You can see it. It's a wonderful movie. It gives you the background how Nike got really started and overtook Adidas as the main company. So that, as far as I was concerned, was going very well. I'd got 96, was Atlanta. I sat down and met Michael Jordan and sat down with the Dream Team, the whole of the Dream Team, Magic Johnson, Pippi, Scottie Pippen, the Mailman, all the big names. I sat on a bench with them. And I've got a film, and I got a photograph, an autograph in the car park for the boys. I said for Ben and for James and for Lloyd, who's now coaching professionally. And so he said, yeah, sure, no problem. Did the 3, brought them back. Do you know what they said to me? I bet you did that. I said, it's not my handwriting. He actually did that, and they've still got them. Certainly James has. I know that Ben will have as well. So that was 96, and then 2000 and beyond. And so there I was. I'd gone from schoolboy to schoolboy athlete to international athlete to an Olympic athlete, and then I'd been in Ware since 1977 actually, and I'd enjoyed Ware, having come from Lincolnshire. It was Hertfordshire's really been wonderful to me and to Shirley and to the family, and when you go through all of the Olympics that you did, and I come back to Ware and I find that there are so many people there who appreciated what we did. And I must say that when I look at this brochure and I look at the dinner, the 25th dinner, we're coming up to the 35th dinner, that would be quite a big one to do. And I go back and I pull out the drawer, and there's the badge on my Olympic blazer for the Mexico Olympics in 1968. And I was then invited by the Olympians to go back and host in London the reunion of the 1968 Olympic Games, all sports. So that was quite something. And then on the basis of that, I went back to do the 1972 Olympics in Birmingham. So that's the last one I'm doing. I'm not doing any more. It gets too difficult, actually, especially when you've got a foot that doesn't work. But and then I came back here, and most recently I've been given the freedom of the town of Ware, which is quite an honour, which is rather nice. And my grandson, who stood next to me when they announced this, said to me, Grandpa, I said, the kebab house down in Ware, I said, is that part of the deal? Do we get free kebab? Do we get free kebabs? And I actually put that into my acceptance speech. So I thought was quite good. So I still hold the chair of Woodson Park. I was a former chairman of the Ron Pickering Trust, which was a great honour over the years. We gave £40,000 a year to athletes, needy athletes who hadn't got the money to see them through their careers as athletes, youngsters. And then what else? I was a member of the Variety Club, helping them and the kids' charity Sparks. I got involved with an awful lot of things actually, and when I look back, I wonder how I ever had all the time for it. I coached Daley Thompson in the hurdles and in the shot for a brief period of time when he was trying to sort out whether he could get to the first hurdle in 7 strides rather than 8, which would give him an extra 1/10 of a second. But of course, you don't do it that way. You do it on a touchdown on 3 hurdles and 5. And I told him that he wasn't quick enough to get to 3rd and 5th hurdle, so he should stay on 8. And not only that, I said, what happens if you get a headwind and it's raining, and also you've had a hard first day. You've had a 400 you've had to run 46 seconds in the previous night, and high hurdles is the first event of the second day. So I don't think I'd got anything. Oh yeah, I did the Olympic Games, the Sony. Sally Garnell rang me, and she said, I've just bought this Sony Olympic game, she said, and you keep criticising me for hitting hurdles. I said, because you have to spend time putting all of these sort of options of so-and-so came first, so-and-so came second. It took a whole week, the first one I did, and the second one I did took a day. Technology moved on, it really did. I've had a great career, and have I missed much out, Shirley? Oh, you're quite right. I think that's absolutely right. I do waffle on. I should be a commentator. I think I'll leave it there. I mean, if you've got a question, please ask. But I do apologise for going on too long. I always do it, and I'm totally out of control. Totally out of control.
You're clearly never lost for words, are you?
No, not normally. No. I try not to be. No.
So, I mean, thank you so much. I mean, it's been glorious, absolutely glorious. I'm not particularly an athletics person, but you really brought it all alive, and it has been great. No problem saying that whatsoever.
Let's go.
You can
Well
shake
done.
hands.
Very good evening. Thank you. Lovely.
Well, I'd just like to say it as it is. That is, yeah, you see, and you do, what has gone before. This was my Olympic final sheet. So it was signed by the Olympic champion. And all of these sheets. So just imagine you've got to pick out 8 seconds worth of information.
And be able to read that small print.
Yeah, you're right. The researcher puts that together for us, but then you've got to, when you've got a load of these, then you have to, I get one for every event.
Yeah.
So you have to sort of go through them all.